Hello, everyone. My name is Pearl Bayda, and I'm a consultant for early learning, grades pre-kindergarten to 3 at Saskatoon Public Schools. I'm going to share a bit about my teaching journey and how shifting some literacy instructional practices impacted student growth within my kindergarten classroom. I'm in a category of people who I would classify as like maybe didn't know that they wanted to be a teacher when they originally wanted to go to school. I went to college and graduated with a degree outside of education, but through what I like to term happy coincidences, came to discover that teaching was what I really wanted to do. I went back to school and became licensed and started out teaching middle years and then pursued a master's degree in curriculum development. In 2015, I moved to Saskatoon and I've taught several grades here in the city, but I happened to teach kindergarten or begin teaching kindergarten the same year that one of my own children was going into kindergarten. It ended up being a catalyst for some of my own learning about how children develop early literacy because she wasn't developing skills in a manner that I would have expected. And I wasn't really certain how to support her. I had previously taught grades 1 and 2, and looking back, it's hard to say, but I can see how heavily certain principles of whole language and balanced literacy really drove the way that I taught. I so fervently believed that exposure to text and discovery learning would create an environment where students would learn to read. But I was faced with evidence in my classroom and at home. That evidence was in direct contrast to that thinking. In case anyone isn't presently located in Saskatchewan or isn't familiar with the structure, I want to start with an introduction to how early learning is structured here in our province. Children have the option of attending community-run preschools, and there are also some options for more formal pre-kindergarten. Kindergarten is actually not mandatory, so children who will turn 5 by the end of January within that school year are eligible to register for kindergarten. Um, Kindergarten is also half time, which can mean either half day or every other day, depending on the program. So children who enter school really have a wide variety of exposure to formal schooling, and that can have some impact on how we teach. As I began teaching kindergarten, I instructed using strategies that I knew at the time and felt confident with. We sang songs and played with rhymes and poetry. I introduced letters in what I consider to be kind of a traditional manner, so focusing mostly on letter name and formation of those letters. I believed that exposure to rich read alouds would drive students to make the connections they needed to in order to learn to read and write. I taught reading and writing mini lessons and offered independent time for students to practice those skills. And many students in my class developed early literacy skills. But having taught grade 1, I knew what skills they needed to be able to evidence in order to accomplish what's necessary at some other levels. And when parents inquired about their children's progression and how things were coming along, I would refer them to the strategies we used in class. I assured them they could be patient and that that development would happen. But on reflection, the instruction I was using didn't feel right. I sensed that I wasn't creating the transformative learning that my students needed to be able to thrive as readers and writers. And there's that kind of constant question of, well, what about the ones who aren't developing the necessary skills? And that factored into my home life because around the same time, I noticed that my daughter wasn't acquiring letters and letter sounds in a typical manner. Her learning reminded me of students that I was seeing within my own class. She seemed to need some type of intervention, but I wasn't exactly sure what that would look like or could look like. As I, I've always been kind of a reflective person, and as I was questioning my own instruction, looking into different resources, and frantically Googling lots of ideas, I happened to reach out to Andrea to ask her about a book written by an author who I won't name, and I was wondering if it could be helpful. Andrea, this is where our friendship began because she set me straight and helped me understand that that resource was grounded in whole language and really my learning started at that point and has grown from that point. I hope there are other people who, like me, have been just shocked to understand the truly immense depth and breadth of research and knowledge that there is around how children learn to read. I truly had no idea and thought that, well, of course, what's being published by, you know, curriculum developing publishers as guidance for teachers, it must be based on scientific research. And to find out that the research was so contrary was tough. And so, after lots of reading and lots of soul searching, I did adopt some different methods within my classroom over the following 2 years. We began using a more systematic and explicit program for phonemic awareness and for phonics instruction. Our phonics instruction included development of word recognition, dictation, word building in simple ways, right? It's kindergarten still. We want it to be authentic to that type of learning, but just was a little more clear, right? That explicit piece is just really being clear in the ways that we're instructing. In terms of their word recognition, we were tying that same piece right back to whatever letters and sounds we were working on at the same time. So I really consider it all very interconnected, and in that way helps solidify it for children as they're learning. The more that it's not unique and separate, that all of the different content areas kind of are weaving together, kind of like the reading rope, right? Where it's just solidifying and tying those different elements together. In terms of the encoding and writing piece, that's where we were word building and using dictation and really a systematic instruction based on child development. Here's a breakdown of the different observations I made after some of those shifts within our instruction. So we began using a program of explicit instruction, which was based on a systematic scope and sequence. And after having implemented that, I was able to see that students could visibly, so we used some hand signals and different pieces where I could see it amongst my class during whole group instruction. I could see it visibly. I could audibly hear them blending and deleting and substituting phonemes. We use a division screener, and within that screener, it is looking at diagnostic elements for much more than just rhyming or syllables. And so my students really needed to be able to do that. We know it's developmentally appropriate and critical for these children. So with the program I had been using, if there were times when within the diagnostic there were pieces I needed to push in on, I now had the tools I felt to reliably intervene when there were skills that needed strategic instruction, whether that was in a small group or if it was my whole group, evidencing that as a majority. So we played games and we had different elements, but part of that was a structural routine that really gave me, I think, the skills that I needed in order to target their phonological awareness. Within our phonics instruction, I began introducing letters in a systematic way, which integrated retrieval practices. And that meant that students then had an opportunity for cumulative review within their lessons. We used visual and auditory drills that also included a gesture, which, similar to the phonemic awareness, gave me a cue I could use to gauge their understanding. A really big change for me, it was in how I used whole group instruction. Most instruction in literacy, as these children were novices in some of these skills, I was able to determine that a majority of them needed these different skills, and that so a lot of my instruction could occur in a large group rather than multiple small groups. And then I could just push in to pull some flexible groupings when I needed to provide targeted instruction. Where student visual recognition of letters in my class had always been relatively steady, my students previously had not demonstrated strength in their letter sound knowledge. After shifting these practices, this was an area where I saw significant growth. Not only did they know the sounds in isolation, but they could manipulate those sounds in vowel, consonant, and CVC words when reading and writing. Built into our structures and routines was also time for them to practice those word recognition skills that they were developing. And like I mentioned earlier, that really tied together the instruction of the letters and the sounds, and then that blending and segmenting and decoding. I think it really ties it all together so well for children, especially when they're looking at some of those nice short words, right? Those vowel consonants, so in, at, on, and the CVC words as well. And I think something I particularly notice is that in my current position for our school division, it can be challenging to communicate that early learning can and should include both explicit instruction and play. Sometimes we create kind of this false dichotomy that it has to be either or, but learning can be playful, and that occurs in unstructured playtimes, but it also can occur during instructional time with our games and our learning. And you can see, I don't know, in this picture, we loved to play heads up. And at Dollar Tree or Dollarama, even, you can buy those little headbands. So yeah, I called it heads up, but really I mean headbands. So where we would put often a word, and here I had scaffolded for them that just they could choose. They knew that on that headband was one of those different words, and I just had them separated by medial sound, or like that middle vowel, and they would try and figure out, well, what is the word that's on my headband. We also practiced with short little decodables that they loved to color the little pictures, and then we might emphasize some irregular, high frequency words along with our decoding. And so kept it really playful, kept it really short and developmentally appropriate, still had unstructured play, but part of the play and the playful learning environment can occur even with our instruction. Hands down, the most significant way that I saw structured literacy impact student learning was in the way that they wrote. Writing can be scary. Children inherently can be afraid of the risk-taking within writing, can be afraid of being wrong when spelling. And what I saw in my classroom was children choosing to write during playtimes. And not only that, not only were they choosing not just the drawing, but to write stories and craft and create together, but when they did so, it meant they were applying what they knew. So I was able to look, and the ways that they wrote and what they wrote gave me the most accurate measure of what they knew and were able to do. It provided me with ways to be able to push in, to improve my instruction and identify ways that, oh, I should be looking to do this next. Or, oh, I see that we're mistaking this sound, and that maybe means I should be emphasizing it a different way. So it helped me improve my instruction. It showed me, what do they actually know, who is engaging with this work and who isn't, how can I figure out why that is or why not, and it gave me an idea of where to go next and how they were progressing and developing along that kind of continuum of early literacy. Shifting these elements of my classroom instruction to be more explicit and systematic helped me stay rooted in what science says about early childhood development and early literacy skills, and which skills are most critical. It meant that I could feel confident in having provided access to the necessary prerequisite skills that the children in my class would need in order to learn to read, and still maintain the spirit of an exploratory kindergarten environment.